Hi, my name's Sandy Steele. I live in Gloucestershire, and this video is an attempt to try and give you prima facie evidence from public documentary evidence that the UK's elections, and indeed other elections, are comprehensively cartel frauded by the mainstream National Party politicians. That means the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party, and as accessories the UKIP and the Greens, basically by a cartel of National Party politicians, rigs the elections in their national corporate favour and or global corporate favour. And that this has been going on really since they gave us universal suffrage, and basically it means that we can't take control of our own localities and individual control. So basically nationalism and globalism dominates, and localism and individualism are suppressed and oppressed by criminal means. This isn't by informed consent. And just as an aside, obviously the mainstream national parties, those 5 mainstream national parties, got caught for the election expenses scandal in 2009, where they were all coordinating since 1955 to suppress their expenses declarations so that they could systematically and in fact comprehensively fraud us on expenses. So it shouldn't be come as any surprise that the same national corporate parties are coordinating to fraud our elections and have been doing so for decades. I can get into the niceties of the matter of fraud. Fraud is in fact the definition of fraud is a person or persons misleading in order to benefit themselves and or others and or disadvantage others. To be indicted and convicted of fraud, you have to be aware of fraud. However, if you are in public office and you're engaged in fraud, or that either within office or outside office that affects public office, there's a higher parameter, and you can be, even though you can claim that you aren't aware of the fraud that you are involved in, you can be tried and convicted for misconduct in public office, or if it's a serious fraud, gross misconduct in public office. Because the peculiarity of fraud is that you can be involved in a fraud, for instance in a cult, and be evangelizing for that cult and not aware that the leaders of the cult are actually frauding, extorting people, that it's a scam. So that's the nicety of the law, that basic people in public office, whether they're knaves or fools, there's a higher parameter. They can be, if they're associated in a fraud affecting public office, they can be tried and convicted for misconduct in public office or gross misconduct in public office, even though they claim that they're not aware of the fraud that they are involved in. And most of them are idiots. They didn't invent these frauds, they inherit these frauds. So it's absolutely fine. I mean, we just simply can nail all these knaves and fools, this cacocracy of knaves and fools, as I say, for misconduct in public office or gross misconduct in public office. If it's fraud of the elections, obviously it's gross misconduct in public office, and that is a felony. So, and it doesn't matter whether they know. It's just simply that they are involved in it. Right. So now just turn on the light so that you can see these elections. The first two, there are 29 pages here, which are all the local election results for the 2011 elections. I'm picking the 2011 local elections for my constituency because the returning officer has included all the relevant information, whereas the 2015 elections, you can see he's omitted how many vacant seats are being contested in the elections, and also the size of the electorate, and therefore the information isn't available here. And the question also obviously arises, why is the returning officer omitting this very important information from the election results in 2015, I would suggest that it's that he is party to it. In fact, I know he's party in it. Right. I'm going to just use the two first sheets as examples of the two types of frauds that are engaged in. This first sheet just happens to be, it's page 1 of 29. It happens to have Cirencester town elections, local elections. This is the Watermoor ward, this is the Park ward, this is the Beeches ward. This is a middle-sized town and in England, and it is typical of middle-sized towns. The wards, notice the size of the wards, 3,230 with 3 councillor seats, vacant seats, 2,859 electors with 3 councillor seats, 3,369 electors with 3 councillor seats. This is the most local election within this typical middle-sized town. Suddenly move to the rural local elections, where there are parish councils, but it's the same level, and you've got Cutstean, Daglingworth and Didmartin. Just happens to be page 2. Suddenly you can see that there are 5 vacant seats, 5 councillors for 56 electors. There are 5 councillors in Daglingworth for 234 electors, 7 councillors for 345 electors. So you can see that the local wards within a middle-sized town are essentially 10 times less represented. They're roughly 10 times bigger, and they've got less representation. That's just the beginning of the frauds. Obviously, that's very clear that the towns and the cities are actually 10 to 100 times less represented at the local level. In other words, a type of rotten borough system is going on. But notice also the discrepancy in terms of description. As soon as these wards are supersized, suddenly all the candidates are declaring their political parties, or in this case that they're an independent, independent and their political parties. But notice the independents lose. They lose. On both occasions they lose, and in fact an independent isn't even standing here. So the mainstream national parties are winning at the local elections in the towns, but the wards are 10 times larger than the rural wards. Move to the rural wards, suddenly no one is describing any parties or that they're independents. So they're basically not putting out or telling anyone a manifesto, and you can see that it's coordinated. So the former system, here what they're doing is they're gerrymandering the size of the election, the local election, so that it becomes very difficult for independents to actually raise their profile, get their independent manifesto around, and so on and so forth. And essentially that plays into the hands of the mainstream national parties at your so-called local election. So they're rigging the elections by simply supersizing, gerrymandering the size of the wards by 10 to 100 fold compared to the rural local elections. And suddenly they then, because they know it's safe to do so, they're suddenly coming out of the woodwork and declaring their political parties. Here, the mainstream national parties are telling their candidates not to declare their mainstream party political association, so they are coordinatedly hiding their parties and their manifestos from the electorates. This means that they can covertly coordinate against anyone who is genuinely honest, standing as an independent, putting out a manifesto. They will be coordinatedly campaigned against, and even if they get in, there will still be this undeclared party operating against them who will outvote them on all occasions. So essentially the fraud is in here. This is a bid rigging fraud where the bid to the electors is being rigged, coordinatedly rigged, very obviously, and this is what's called a market share or gerrymandering fraud, where they're supersizing wards. And in both cases, these two systems are what are operated across the whole of the UK's elections. I don't think you may find a few exceptions, but I think you will find one or other of these frauds are operating across the whole of your elections. So you merely have to go and look on your own election authority website and get down to this level of detail, and the election frauds will be revealed. Now, if the mainstream national parties are frauding your local elections in their mainstream national corporate parties' candidates' favour, that means that ordinary people, honest people, cannot get involved at the local elections and get experience and a reputation, and that protects the mainstream national parties' politicians above. So a fraud of the local elections is an entry gate fraud, and that protects the party politicians above. So this fraud across our local elections, in fact, is a fraud of all our elections. Obviously we've got rid of the EU now, but this system was a system to enable them to actually fraud even the EU elections. So this is a comprehensive fraud of the UK's elections. I'll just now move on and just show you the other 27 pages, so that you see that this same system is replicated blank, 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 except for they're simply saying things like candidate for wider countryside. They're not saying whether they are party political or independents, and therefore they're not obviously producing manifestos. Coordinatedly, not declaring their parties. These are the smaller elections. Again, this is slightly larger, it's getting up to 2,000, so they're on the cusp, but a Liberal Democrat has come out of the woodwork and is declaring. Someone's declaring as an independent, thereby hangs a tail, but the vast majority not. In fact, very often these independents are false flag operators. In fact, I happen to know that Trevor Higg coordinates the undeclared parties, so he's actually part of it, and he's sufficiently dishonest that he declares himself as an independent at one and the same time. Another way of these bid rigging cartels being revealed very clearly is continually the number of candidates standing very closely equates to the number of vacant seats available, which shows that there is coordination, not only just not to declare whether they're independents or party political candidates, but and therefore not declaring manifestos, not coordinating, not telling the electors what they stand for, but also the number of candidates very closely associates in almost every case with the number of seats available, and ideally they like it so that they have exactly the right number of candidates, or one or two less candidates, so that they don't even have a contested election. These are contested elections. There are only 17 of them. I think the other remaining 76 elections were uncontested because of these cartel frauds. So again, you can see in these smaller elections, Rissington, Loughborough, no one's declaring a party or whether they're independent. Morgasbury, the same. Moreton the Marsh, the same. It's getting larger. It's 2,928, and they're beginning to come out and try to say something. But it's very obviously coordinated. I think there are, well, in this case, in fact, there were 14 candidates for 9 seats. But there is a core who aren't declaring, basically there's a core here that aren't declaring anything. In fact, none of them are really declaring what they stand for, whether they're independents or party political. And it's coordinated. Here, this is actually my local election, that is actually me, I'm a genuine independent. The other 5 were coordinated coordinated against me. They actually produced having said that they're just residents, when I realised what they were up to, I then stood, they then put out an election leaflet with just them on it, but without any manifesto, at all. So they were coordinated beforehand, and they were coordinated to be 5 candidates for 5 seats, and this has been going on in Polton for decades. And when I complained to the police, I was investigated. This is where I am today. Here, typically, 7 seats and 9 candidates, none of them declaring a party or that they're independent. Obviously, that is coordinated. Same here, 12 candidates and 11 seats, none of them declaring anything. Here, some fighting has broken out. It's huge. They know that the independents are going to have very great difficulty. Some of the independents are probably bogus. But you've got essentially 16 candidates standing for 15 seats. What's the chances of that taking place? It's so close to the number of vacant seats that you can see that they are coordinating. It's clearly there's an undeclared party coordinating that. Here's the last contested election, 5 candidates and 6 seats. Now we're moving on to all the uncontested elections, and you can see just this coordinated, no description, or just simply saying what their job is. And in very many cases, you have exactly the right number of candidates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, standing for 5 vacant seats. They get in without an election contest. They do it time and time and time again, and they aren't declaring any parties. So they're not admitting that they're coordinated, but it's very clear that they are coordinated behind the scenes. So they're misleading in order to benefit. In order to ensure that there isn't a proper election contest, because of course real candidates should be declaring that they're independent. If they're independent, they should be declaring a manifesto. If they're obviously party political, they should be declaring a party, and then of course they have an off-the-shelf manifesto. Then people of course know what they stand for. They're not operating undeclared parties and undeclared policies. But here again, very obvious that they're doing that. Here again, Borton, Boxwell, Brimpsfield, Cornwall Green, Ward, Broadwell, Chedworth, Cherrington, Chipping Camden, same fraud in. This is a bid rigging fraud. Now here we've got the market share gerrymander fraud, where suddenly the elections have shot up in size. Only 3 candidates stand for the 3 seats, and they've come out, they've declared it, because they know that with an electorate that size, that it's very unlikely that an independent is even going to stand, and the difficulty of them actually raising their profile in such a huge so-called local ward, they know they're safe. So they are involved in a market share cartel fraud. They're accessories in a market share. They're involved in and beneficiaries of a market share cartel fraud there. Here, essentially, small electorates, 108, 171, 220, not declaring anything. That is a bid rigging cartel fraud. Again, small electorates, 291, 128, 141, 203, Duntersbourne Abbott, Striffield, Dowdeswell, Colesworth. These people are operating a bid rigging cartel fraud. Okay. Here, Duntersbourne Rouse, Eastleach, Elkstone, Evenlode, Fairford, Town, Hawkett Ward, 253 electors, 136 electors, 188 electors, 277 electors, 55 electors. Loads of councillors, no one declaring anything, whether they are associated with political parties or whether they're independents, and so obviously not putting out manifestos. And they're doing it coordinatedly. Again, Great Rissington, Guiting Power, Hatherup, Kemble, again, nothing declared in the way of their politics. And therefore an undeclared party is getting in with undeclared policies. Essentially, the electorate are being forced to sign a blank, coerced to basically sign a blank cheque, and they're basically rigging it in that way. Again, blank, 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 blank. Here, Lechlade-on-Thames, the electorate is suddenly rather larger. People are starting to come out, claiming that they're independent, but exactly the right, and I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, exactly the right number of candidates standing for available seats. What's the chance of that not having been coordinated? There is obviously coordination there. Now, I've explained about fraud. Some people may not be aware to start off with, but they are standing for public office and they ought to be whistleblowing. Therefore, they're idiots, or they're actually consciously part of it. So either way, they're guilty of, actually in this case, gross misconduct in public office. Again, blank, 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 blank. The same. Small electorates, 502, 202, 162, and they're coordinating not to declare their political party associations, membership, support, or their independence. So there is an undeclared party, and again, it's very closely associated. 5 candidates standing for 5 seats, 5 candidates standing for 5 seats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 candidates standing for seats, 7 seats, obviously coordinated. Okay. So we go on. Mickleton, Naunton, Northleach, same fraud, bid rigging, cartel frauds. Bid rigging, cartel frauds in Northleach, Eastington, Oddington, Preston, coordinatedly not declaring their party political associations or that they're independents. Therefore not informing the electors of their political interests, and actually it's coordinated, clearly coordinated. Coordinated in that they're not declaring, omitting to declare information that obviously they should be declaring, and in order to mislead. Same thing there with Quennington, Rencombe, Sapperton, Sevenhampton. Same thing here, Sherborne, Shipton, Shipton Moyne, Somerford Keynes, all rigged. Same thing here, South Cerney, 2,696. This is a village that has been expanded inside. They are still actually operating the bid rigging cartel fraud. 11 seats available, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 candidates. Obviously coordinated. They very often like to have one less than the actual full seats, because they can then get together and co-opt, after they're elected, the 11th. And sometimes, because they're operating under Clare Party, in a rural area, they may be Tory, Liberal Democrat dominant, or just Tory dominant maybe, and they will then actually invite in someone who is more explicitly and more obviously a member of the Conservative Party, who would stand out actually as being so here if they actually stood for the election, particularly if they omitted to admit it. Southwark, the same, 5 seats, 5 candidates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no one declaring any party, obviously coordinated. Stow-on-the-Wold, larger electorate, people beginning to come out and declare stuff, but really not declaring very much, just their jobs, not declaring whether they are party politically associated or whether they're, well, in this case, they are declaring that they are independents, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's obviously coordinated. So these so-called independents are actually part of it. And so they ought to have been whistleblowing. And so that they are accessories in it, or parties in it, and they are guilty with the rest of most gross misconduct in public office. Same thing, Swell, Temple Guyting, Tetbury, Tottenham, Upper Rislington, Western Burton and Avesbury, same thing going on. Western Subedge, Willersley, Winstone, Witherton, same thing going on. And finally, Wick Rislington, same thing going on. 5 vacancies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 candidates, no one declaring a single thing. Obviously an undeclared party is coordinating there to rig the elections, and obviously if anyone else stood, this undeclared party would be coordinating against them, or be likely to coordinate against them. and even if they get in, this undeclared party would actually be outvoting them the whole time. So I hope that has given you pause for thought, and obviously if you live in an urban or city area, it is that market share cartel fraud that you will see. Please look into your own, get onto your own election authority website, tap in elections, look at your local elections, see whether they've supersized the wards comparatively to these genuinely local wards, and see how the independents are being squeezed out even at the local level, and lay a complaint. And if you want to contact me, my home telephone number is 01285 850 590. Thanks very much for watching this video.